Yeah, I think you posed a very difficult question, and one I'm still yet to find an answer to. I think basically your question was, how do you love your enemy when they're trying to kill your neighbor? Because Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, and he also says, love your enemy. So when your enemy is trying to kill your neighbor, it's sort of a conundrum, a paradox, whatever you want to call it. That's why I suggest in my ABCs of New Testament nonviolence, right? Active, be creative, call on the proper authorities. But the truth is, we live in a very, very evil present evil age. We live in a time when people like us are few, and those every generation come to this understanding don't do very well. We're sort of blessed to live in this time. If we had lived with these ideals back in the good old medieval age, or the not so good age of Michael Servetus or Servet, who was burned alive at the stake, not for this topic but for other issues, not believing in the eternal Son. It's very sort of we're spoiled, right, to do this. But there have been times in the history we could have died, and probably could have been killed for this. I suggest my ABCs, but obviously that's not a fix all, right? We sometimes have to die. We sometimes have to be killed. We sometimes have to be tortured for our beliefs. Not only us, but our loved ones, family, friends, etc., our brethren in the faith. And I can only think of what Paul says once again in Romans chapter 8, who will bring any charge against the chosen ones of God? It is God who makes us right. So who will condemn us? It is Messiah Jesus who died, even more, who was resurrected, who is now at the right hand of God interceding for us. Who will separate us from the love of Messiah? Will oppression, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, or violence? And then Paul quotes from the Old Testament, and he says, as it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. That section speaks to me all the time because you have the resurrection hope. And that's why I believe what I believe now, even contrary to the present evil age and the worldview and to the common sense, quote unquote, of people living in this present evil age. What do you mean you're trying to live this life and crazy ideals? You're endangering yourself, your family, your friends, your neighbor. Well, I love that section of Romans 8. You have the resurrection, you have the Messiah once again as our model. But sometimes the fact is we are sheep among wolves, right? Jesus says in his so-called priestly prayer in John chapter 17, he's praying for us. And he prays to the Father and says, Father, they're in the world, but they're not of the world. Keep them safe. Keep them in your love. Many times, obviously, we have to suffer. And that's why, Tracy, I also look to history. As Ken was saying, history is very important. Some historians put it at millions of self-professing Christians who followed this type of thinking and suffered for it, died in horrible ways. Just look at the history, the first 300, 400 years of the Christian movement. That's why I speak about that spirit of martyrdom that has disappeared basically since the 4th or 5th century, when Augustinian theology and Catholicism took over the church. What is it? City of God principles. That now the state is Christian. So that has dominated ever since. That's why we have to go back to the spirit of the early martyrs. And now you can say they were wrong. You can say all those Christians to a person. The history tells how they sang their way into the Colosseums and were eaten by animals alive. They sought martyrdom. Now, I'm not saying let's seek martyrdom, but you get my meaning, I hope. Thanks.